Welcome, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Spring Rights Literary Festival events. Thank you so much for being here. We were just talking about how it's hard to get audiences, so we really appreciate you being here. So the Zoom call for tonight is actually for two events. This 5:30 reading, and there's a 7 o'clock strings attached reading. It's the same Zoom room. You can come to both. There'll be a 15-minute break in between, but I'll keep the room open and I'll be just playing some music. I am Robin Schwartz. I'm the Community Arts Partnership Program and Grant Director. And the Spring Rights Literary Festival is one of our annual programs. We've got a bunch of them. We also have 6 grant programs for Tompkins County artists and not-for-profits doing arts events. And we just launched a creative recovery fund, which is due in June. So if you're from Tompkins County, you might want to look at our grants page. I'm going to put the website, artspartner.org, in the chat when I'm finished talking. And I'll also put the link to springrights.org in the chat. There are over 25 more amazing events, and I hope you can come to many of them. Every event so far has been inspiring and touching, and I know the term Zoom fatigue is out there, but I love the fact that we can get together so easily, without fear of infection. And, there's people all over the world in some of these rooms, which is kind of amazing. Tomorrow is going to be a big day for Spring Rights. At 2 o'clock on Zoom, Dr. Nia Nunn will talk about Inside Black Feminist Alchemy. Liminal, a group reading, is live at Buffalo Street Books, but it's also live streamed, so you can stay home and just watch it on the live stream. There's an event that is live at the library called Youth Rights, Kids Erasing the Words. After the Liminal group reading at Buffalo Street Books, immediately following, there's a Finger Lakes memoir anthology reading. And then at 6:30 at night, there's a Zoom event, which was originally live, now it's Zoom, called Digging Deep Within to Find My Neighbor. So there's a lot happening tomorrow. The Zooms will be taped and the live streams will also be available on video. I'm also going to put in the chat a donation link. All of the Spring Rights events are free, but like any good not-for-profit, we must continually ask for donations. Even $10 is great. More is also great. We used to sell buttons, but no one wanted a damn button. And now it's, it's on Zoom. So thank you if you can donate to the Community Arts Partnership, because we do good stuff. That's not our official byline. Some housekeeping, please stay on mute. Please use the chat heavily for questions and comments. It's the way we see engagement in a Zoom event like this, so Zoom chatting is most welcome. And by the way, if you are not from Tompkins County, tell us where you're from in the chat, because that's always fun to see. Your bathrooms are down the hall. And I'm going to send everyone who attended a Spring Rights event a really short multiple choice Google survey in about a month. If you can fill that out, it would be amazing, because we really need to know where, if we're spending money in places for marketing and publicity and we don't need to. I'm starting to suspect that most of this is word of mouth. So helping us with that, basically, if we spend less money on marketing, we have more money to pay the artists. So that'll be an important survey. And I'll probably offer like fill out the survey and you might win $25 or something like that. I'd like to thank our wonderful Spring Rights sponsors. They are Ithaca College, Wegmans, M&T Bank, CFCU Community Credit Union, the Odyssey Bookstore, and the Ithaca Marriott. We receive grant support from New York State Council on the Arts, Poets and Writers, and the Tompkins County Tourism Program. Our media sponsors are Ithaca Voice, WITH Radio, and WSKG. So tonight's group reading, we have 7 writers, and they will read in this order: Brenna Fitzgerald, Sorayya Khan, Dan Small, Fran Markover, Stephen Paling, Dan Rosenberg, and Daphne Sola. And we will begin with me turning the mic over to Brenna. And you guys can introduce yourselves. Hi, Brenna.
Hi. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm Brenna. I'm a writer, an editor, and a coach. And what I'm reading today is an excerpt from a longer piece of experimental memoir. And it came out of a writing exercise in which I was asked to cast myself as a character in my own narrative. So basically tell my story in third person. So this is what came out of that. It's called Time Out of Time. Part 1. Grief, she writes in her blue-backed journal, is a mix of fear and anger and nostalgia. This cocktail is how she feels most days. As she writes, she realizes she forgot to include sadness. Her eyes are uncomfortably dry. Missing someone is painful. She missed her mom while spending weekends with her dad as a child. She missed her dad in those same weekends, his presence more of an absence. In the dream, she is making scrambled eggs with veggies from the garden. As she takes her first bite and begins to chew, a man walks into the kitchen and shows her a plant that looks like a fern laminated in plastic. He tells her he found this plant in her garden, that it's toxic, and that it spreads toxicity to everything it touches. She had picked herbs from the garden for this scramble, and her stomach churns. She's not sure if the nausea is from the poison or the fear of being poisoned. Before the dream, her mother tells her about the lump, a malignant tumor, breast cancer. Her mother must decide whether to get a lumpectomy or a mastectomy, whether or not to get one breast or both breasts removed, whether or not to get some lymph nodes removed, whether or not to get reconstructive surgery, whether or not to do radiation and chemo, whether or not to take hormone drugs that leave her body at risk for uterine cancer, or the drugs that leave her body at risk for loss of bone density, when and how to take medical leave. She helps her mother sort through pamphlets from the doctor's office and books recommended by breast cancer survivors. Her mother is good at research, but she gets overwhelmed. She dreams up her own horrific facts. In the dream, she looks out over a frozen landscape. Her sister calls and says, "I don't want to tell you." She asks, "Tell me what?" Her sister says, "The percentage breakdown of our chances of getting cancer since both our parents had cancer." She says, "Just tell me," thinking it must be 100%. Her sister says 50-50. She thinks that's not so bad. Doesn't everyone have a 50-50 chance of getting cancer? Her dad told her he had prostate cancer a few years before he died, which was a few years before her aunt died of ovarian cancer. It might have been in an email, since that's the main way he communicated with her. She remembers all the big words, technical cancer words, as her father recounted the many stages of his treatment, the stages his body would move through, what to expect. He wrote to her like she was a cancer patient herself. She wonders if her mother's body will move through those same stages. Part 2. Her friend gave her a dying orchid, wilted from neglect. She was used to this, people giving her their dying orchids, and willingly took the sick plant in. She found enjoyment nursing it back to health, first by transplanting it into a clay pot with good drainage, then placing it near a bright window and watering it on a schedule, about every 10 to 14 days. A few times a month, she dusted off the leaves with a wet cloth. She found particular enjoyment in her friend's orchid, which eventually rebloomed 6 months later with 2 stalks of pale pink flowers, dark purple in the center. She felt pleasure staring at the orchid for long stretches of time each day and sent pictures of it to her friend with captions that read, "Ursula says hi." One evening, her friend comes over for a dinner of poached salmon, salad, and mashed potatoes. After dinner, her friend stares at the orchid for a long length of time while she does the dishes. The very next day after the dinner, her friend texts her, "If you want to give Ursula back now, I think I found a spot for her." Her chest hurts at the thought of giving the orchid back. Her mind gleans over the past 8 months of memories with the plant, pausing to linger on all the milestones of this orchid's rebloom. The new leaf, the inch-long flower stalk, the first moment a petal opened, revealing pale cherry blossom pink. She throws down the phone and says, "I'm not going to respond." The next morning, she sits down to do a guided meditation in which she is invited to think about how much she cherishes her life and how often this drives the impulse to protect it and to guard the heart. Beneath the clinging, gripping, and tightness is a basic desire for control in the face of life's uncertainties. She listens as she's told to open her heart, to open to possibility. Sometimes she remembers this and sometimes she forgets. When she remembers, it feels easier to let go. It feels easier to let go of the grip, knowing change is the nature of everything. Her mind wanders to a talk she heard that said something similar but in different words, about small acts of generosity as an easy way to practice letting go before the ultimate letting go. This makes her feel a little better about giving the orchid back to her friend. Part 3. In the dream, she enters a building and starts walking down a long hall with no windows until she sees a person shaking at the end of the hall wrapped in a purple sweater. She stops, touches the person's shoulder, and realizes it's her grandmother, Gammy, who died 10 years ago from a heart condition. In the dream, Gammy is crying, struggling, Gammy says, to get away from the crazy who was following her around. Suddenly, the talking Gammy peels away from the body of the Gammy in the purple sweater and hovers, weightless, in the hallway. She takes the translucent hand of her ghost grandmother and walks her further down the hall toward a door. When she turns to look at Gammy's face, the face is much younger. It's her mother's face with brown eyes instead of green, a pointed nose instead of a round one. As they approach the door at the end of the hall, she tells the ghost that everyone has a crazy, that you live with it and you make peace with it because you can never get away, and the itch to get away will only cause suffering. She opens the door at the end of the hall. A warm yellow light pours in. It looks green and sunny on the other side of the door. The ghost now has two faces overlaid on one another. She can see both the expressions of her grandmother and those of her mother in one face. In her waking life, she walks to her bathroom window and looks out at the dawn light stretching through mist. She sees two deer eating apples on the dewy lawn, one bigger than the other. Although she is careful and quiet, they hear her movement and appear startled. The small deer looks at the big deer for guidance on whether to stay or to flee. She looks up the meaning of deer in her animal medicine book and reads how they symbolize gentleness. Like the dappling of fawn's coat, both the light and the dark may be loved to create gentleness and safety for those who are seeking peace. Part 4. On her walk, she pulls a dead snake off the road, its blood a fresh pool. The day before, she pulled a dead dragonfly and a dead bird off the road. In addition to dead creatures, she often pulls live ones off the road, especially red Fs that like to sunbathe on the warm pavement, unsuspecting. While walking, she notices how quickly the leaves are changing from green to yellow, orange, and red. The gusty autumn air blows tree branches up and down, the leaves undulating. When she looks around at all the trees together, they appear to be breathing as one organism. Loose yellow leaves fall like golden glitter in the dimming light. She remembers a similar moment of tree magic from cherry blossom season back when she lived in Japan. That spring, when her mother came to Japan to visit her, the way the loose cherry blossom petals fell on their faces when the wind blew, covering everything in a layer of pale pink. They gave the camera to a passerby, gathered handfuls of petals, and threw them up in the air, laughing as he snapped the photo. That moment in time feels so close right now on this autumn day with the trees letting go of their leaves. It also feels very far away, lifetimes ago. She continues to walk. The air smells earthy and sweet, the aroma of decaying leaves. As a kid, she pressed leaves with her grandmother, making bookmarks and placemats, giving them away as birthday gifts. In Japan, pressing plants and crafting them into images is an ancient art practice called oshibana that dates back to the 16th century. Foliage, including whole flowers, petals, leaves, and varied organic pieces, are pressed until dry and flat, using a variety of methods. She once read that the most important element of this process is timing, because the leaves and flowers need to be pressed at the right moment so that they will retain their vibrant colors. She stops walking to text her mother, telling her to enjoy the day, that it's beautiful, that the trees are spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenna. I wanted to remind everybody that all of the artist bios are on the springwrites.org website. And I put that link in the chat. And I'm also, if the artist has a website, I'm going to put that website in the chat. Brenna's website is up there right now. And thank you everyone who is commenting. So writers, definitely check out the chat so you can see all the nice things people are saying about you. Next up is Sorayya Khan. Welcome.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you for organizing this event and doing Spring Writes as a whole for all of us. I'm a novelist, but I'll be reading today from We Take Our Cities With Us, which is a memoir that's coming out in October. I'll be reading from a section that is set in Islamabad, Pakistan in the 1970s when I was a child. My mother, white and taller than my father by a few inches, did not stand out in Islamabad as much as you would think. For one thing, the capital was sparsely populated, so there weren't many people to compare her against. Where are all the people? My grandfather used to say to my father, not here because they have more sense than you. And where there were others, they too were foreigners, employees at embassies or any of the network of international organizations that existed even then. There was a time in that first year that I recall her completely out of place, but not imagining the same for myself or my siblings. A few weeks after we arrived, my aunt took us to the butcher in order to give my mother a lesson on how to buy meat in Pakistan. The butcher was like nothing we'd ever seen, although we looked away and pretended otherwise. My mother did not look away, and she did not pretend. The butcher was an open-aired meat market where carcasses buzzing with flies were impaled with hooks that hung from meat stalls. Dozens of chickens were crowded in stacked cages, and blood flowed in the open drains. My aunt expertly navigated the drains and the stalls, giving instructions regarding her order in one place and taking it to another to be ground or cut as she wanted. My mother walked alongside her, appearing attentive to what she was told, skipping with care over the drains and swatting at the flies, all the while intending never to return. When the outing was complete and we returned to my aunt's, my mother instructed us to take off our shoes at the door. She reappeared with a rag, dropped to her bare knees, and scrubbed clean the soles of our shoes, all while my aunt cried, leave it, I'll get someone else to do it. And my mother paid her no mind and embarrassed us all. We can do without meat, I'd overhear her say when my father returned from work. But that wasn't necessary because not too long after that, a butcher of the type she was accustomed to opened a shop a few streets away in Kosar Market. The day we moved from our aunt's home into our own, two servants met us at the driveway, both in white uniforms my aunt had tailored for them. My mother looked at my father and at them as we emptied the car, wondering who they were. When my father said they were our employees, she looked taken aback and said she did not need help. She said she did not want to worry about the proximity of young men she couldn't trust to her daughters, and the servants were gone by the end of the month. From then on, my mother cooked, cleaned, polished, prepared, and did anything else that making the house hers required. Have mercy, she would shout when we left a room without bothering to pick up our mess. But still angry at leaving Vienna, we had little mercy for her in those days. A few months after our arrival, without giving anyone notice, Tara, my mother, buys a painting. She's wearing her favorite dress, a batik that is all shades of brown, with a trail of square buttons she will save when the fabric is worn through. She drives alone from Islamabad to Rawalpindi, where there is an exhibit of Pakistani painters in the art galleries. The name is generous because in the Civil Lines neighborhood, which was built by the British in the garrison town, the art galleries looks like a house. I picture her in the presence of the painting for the first time, the moment she makes the decision to buy the unexpected artwork. She observes it from a distance and quickly stands within reach. I imagine her overwhelmed with a desire to sink into the kaleidoscope of luminous color, the way she must have dreamed in those early years of plunging into my father's world. From the moment she sees it, she believes what it is not, a calligraphic rendering of the Shahada. She, like all converts, recited the Shahada when she became Muslim and married my father. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, the principal tenet of Islam holds. She is compelled to buy a painting by an unfamiliar artist without consulting my father. She is still wearing the dress when my father returns late from the office, and she claps her hands together and tells him what she has done. He looks at her worriedly when she says she spent the household money on it. But when it arrives the next day, he receives it with delight, and her joy doubles. When the painting is hung, It is like nothing else in our home. The entirety is a wild palette of color, full of what the artist's son will one day describe to me as Indian yellow and olive green and my favorite, cobalt blue. Texture unfurls throughout, as if a brush has rested too long pulling paint and a child's hand has pressed wooden stamps into wet paint. It is modern, I remember thinking, and nothing like us. Afterwards, whenever my mother was asked about the painting that lit up our living room, she'd repeat the Shahada. La ilaha illallah. Don't you see it? She would say to a guest, jumping up to stand beside it and sweeping her arms alongside the dance of bold brush strokes. My father, ever patient with her exuberance, saw it as well. Here, he'd say, and slowly rise from his chair to point to where it began. The three of us would roll our eyes at what became a well-rehearsed skit, although not at any moment did we imagine that the painting was anything but the Shahada. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sorayya.
Welcome.
Next up, we have Dan Small. And I'm going to find Dan. There you are. Take it away.
You caught me getting ready. Hi, I'm Dan Smalls. Many people, when they hear my name, say, "Oh, you're the guy with the shows." So that's what I was until the pandemic, and still am, I should say, until the pandemic came, and I started by writing what became, I guess, a novel, but I put that aside and then started writing some stories when I was out. I would go out for a walk in the cold of winter, and just things came to me, and I wrote stories after seeing like Jeff Tweedy from Wilco write a story about his life, and Ben Folds and people like that who I like. I wanted to sort of write down some of the stories that came up. And the first one that happened, I read at this event last year, and it was really great. It was about how Hall & Oates had played a role in my life from my first kiss to booking Daryl's Club. And this one tonight is about putting on shows with Joan Baez, and also my mother, who I think is, I'm not looking, but probably here listening, 2 days removed from having a new hip. So hi, Mom. And if you're crying, nobody will hear you, just like no one hears all of us applauding when all these other writers do their stuff. So here I go. And if it's a little over 8 minutes, Robin, don't shoot me.
She's here, by the way.
Oh, beautiful. Now you got to make me nervous.
No,
Okay, here we go. My mom is a lovely woman. She's been an elementary school teacher, bookkeeper, property owner, landlord, and business manager over the years. And I know that I get my math skills from her. 6 minutes to Wapner, right? But seriously, some say she's a spitting image of Joan Baez, and I've always agreed. Luckily, as a concert promoter, I've had the opportunity to introduce them on several occasions, and yeah, it's pretty striking seeing them side by side. Maybe that's why I've always had such a soft spot for Joan, and the shows I've produced with her are among my most memorable. And through Joan, I've made some amazing friends and have some pretty unbelievable stories. My first introduction to Joan was through Woodstock, the music festival. I grew up 8 miles from where those 3 days of peace, love, and music happened, although I was born a year after it occurred. The shadow of that event hung all over the area, and visiting the monument and seeing the field was always a mind-blowing experience to me. And many believe that Joan was the star of the show. Her set was deep, and her songs rang so true when the world needed them most. Clearly, we still need them today, but in 1969 in Bethel, New York, Joan was the true queen of the scene. And I'm sure that Joan was as humble then as she is now, and carried herself with the same grace that has become her trademark. And why wouldn't a woman with that much class and grace surround herself with fine handlers? People like Joan's tour manager, Blair, who takes care of her when they're on the road. Being based in Western New York helped, as did our mutual love for riding bikes. But Blair and I have become close friends over the past decade, and early on in that friendship, he shared an Ithaca story from years ago that was too good to be true. Growing up, both Blair and his then girlfriend lived in Arkansas, and they both came to Ithaca College, and after freshman year, quickly decided it wasn't right for them, and they weren't going to return for year 2. However, when that second year started, they found they missed the place and still had friends, and quickly decided to come back by driving. And by doing so in her father's car without asking or telling him what their plans were. So back they came, and no one thought not telling Dad could be a problem. And of course, Dad woke up sure his car was stolen when he found it missing. And when the quote unquote stolen car was discovered on the campus of Ithaca College, they tracked Blair and his lady down to the friend's dorm and didn't just ask them to leave campus and return the father's car, but threatened criminal charges and had Blair sign a letter that banned him from campus forever. Seriously, this actually happened. Many moons later, Joan returned to the State Theater in Ithaca and as usual sold out well in advance. At the same time, there was a brand new president at Ithaca College whom I was introduced to a few times. And of course, this new friend needed a pair of tickets to the sold out show. I was happy to oblige, and right there, I knew exactly what I needed to do. So the show day came and everything went as planned and normal. After the show, I found the president and brought him backstage and introduced him to Blair. He knew the basics, but he asked Blair to tell the story in his own words, which he did. And then El Presidente, as if he was Officer Obie in Alice's restaurant, simply asked him, Blair, have you rehabilitated yourself? And then he officially pardoned Blair on the spot for his misdeeds and welcomed him back to campus anytime. It was hilarious, and I made it official by getting a signed letter from the president and had it framed and sent to Blair. It seems that every Joan show in Ithaca had a story that resonated. Dancing after shows is nothing new for Joan. She gets pretty amped up performing, and in order to relax and get ready to sleep on a tour bus, well, I understand why she wants to shake it, as she says. There's an amazing dive bar next to the State Theater in Ithaca called the Chanticleer, and we'd often end up there after a Joan show at the State. The last show before she retired from touring was extra special. The band hadn't played live since being in France a few months earlier. And when they left that run of shows, the French promoter handed them a lovely bottle of Armagnac that in haste to pack up the gear got stuffed in a road case. Upon unloading into the State to kick off this leg of the tour, Joan found that bottle and stashed it on the bus for a post-show surprise celebration. And that's how it all started. So a while after the show broke and 99% of the sold out crowd was long down the road, I walked Joan out to the bus and we find some local musicians having a jam session on or around the cement flower planter in front of the tour bus in front of the State Theater. And of course, Joan's full-time accompanist, Dirk Powell, was involved. So Joan danced her way through the crowd and sauntered on the bus, pulling me close behind, and broke out the bottle of Armagnac. Her manager, Mark, tour manager, Blair, and my business partner were already chatting on the bus. Everyone had a small cup, and soon enough, Joan was dragging me off the bus behind her while the rest continued their conversation. She danced with me and her son, Gabe, who was playing with her on this tour, and even joined in singing when they played her staple Long Black Veil to the crowd of 15 or so people. And as that party broke up, Joan and Gabe and I headed into the shanty to dance. And Joan picked the songs as always on the jukebox, mostly 60s R&B, and the dance party began in earnest. And Joan and Gabe wound up dancing on the bar while people cheered. I took a video and shared an amazing video of this moment. And the whole world thought it was me up there dancing with Joan. For days, I was getting comments and emails and texts. And it's pretty funny because it was Gabe. Here's the thing. Gabe does look an awful lot like me, probably because Joan and my mom look so much alike. I got so tired of explaining, I started simply saying, yeah, what a night. And it was too bad my mom was tired after the show because I wish she'd come along. I can only imagine the picture of the four of us dancing on that bar. While these dance parties were always amazing, there's one night way back after the first show I did with Joan in Ithaca that took the cake. Sometime just before the show's about to begin, I was downstairs in the dressing rooms as Dirk entered with a look of excitement on his face. It was March and it was cold outside, and he looked like he just got back from being out in the weather, perhaps at dinner with any of his many local musical acquaintances. Little did we know, but Joan was in the hallway right behind him, patiently waiting her turn to ask Blair a question. So Dirk was excited because his pals were playing a very rare gig that night where they played pop songs and bluegrass standards in their own traditional fiddle and banjo and backcountry way out at a roadhouse near Trumansburg, New York. And Dirk really wanted to go play with them. Coincidentally, the tour bus and the band were headed towards Buffalo after the evening, and they would pass right by this roadhouse. And as Dirk explained his desires and the fun and the coolness of the gig, a woman's voice piped up from the hallway, "Hey, I want to go too. That sounds like fun." And it was Joan. And we suddenly had a very unique after party on our hands. So the show comes down and I take Blair and Joan in my car and off we go, following Dirk and his pals to the fabled Bar Angus in Trumansburg. As we arrived, the name was abundantly fitting because of the massive Angus bull on the roof. It was at least 8 feet high and illuminated with a cheap spotlight. And when I say roadhouse, I mean traditional roadhouse. The building was rectangular and narrow and painted a shade of bright blue. As we entered the door, thankfully not a screen or a swinging saloon door, I still couldn't tell if there was a real floor or if it was simply dirt. The beers of choice were Buds and Miller High Lifes and cans before cans were cool again, and the band sounded spectacular. I think we walked into them playing a waltzy version of Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, which still kind of swung, and Joan instantly had me on the floor. Surreal to say the least. And dance we did. The band was a mixture of folks I knew and others who only seemed to come out of the woods to play these extremely special, rare gigs by the band that called themselves the All-American Hell Drivers. They sounded just right for the room, and we had a blast. And the place was somehow packed, and yet accepted Joni as one of their own. They didn't make it weird or ask for too many pictures. She even joined the band on stage for Yes, another iteration of Long Black Veil, and the place went bananas. I don't know how long we were there, but I do recall the legend it has grown into for the 40 or 50 or so folks who were present that night in that tiny little bar in the middle of nowhere. And then the bus pulled in and Blair rounded up Joan and Dirk and off they went towards Buffalo. And I went home with a glow and a buzz that didn't go away for days. What more can I say about this legendary lady? She's an enigma and a true classic, and I think of her often and what she stands for, and the effort she's put into social justice and equality and human rights and simple fairness worldwide. Thank you, Joan Baez. We need more of you on this planet. I'm lucky enough to have another woman in my life I look up to just like you, and luckily you look like sisters. My mom may not have written songs that transcend generations, nor has she played in front of millions of people, but the grace with which she carries herself and the traits she's instilled in me and that same give more than you get mentality that Joan exhibits make me proud to call her mom. And she was at Woodstock in 1969 also, not on stage, but came and went with my dad as relative newlyweds, cruising in and out on my dad's motorcycle. And I'm quite sure Joan was her favorite act too. Thank you.
That is so cool. Your mom is Janet. Janet, tell us if it brought you to tears. Is that the first time she heard it? I can't hear you, but we are.
I think she read a longer version before I edited it down,
Okay.
but yeah.
It's different to hear it live, I think.
I'll let you know.
The next writer we're going to hear from is Fran Markover. And here you are, Fran, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I've been writing poetry for quite a few decades now. And tonight I'll be reading 3 poems from my latest book, Grandfather's Mandolin. The first one is called Dear Grandmother Zipporah, and I'm reading it in honor of the Ukrainian refugees, like my grandparents. Dear Grandmother Zipporah, I want to sail back to 1917, visit the motherland where you learned, bring extra sweaters, chocolate, crackers, just in case. Sail back to 1920, enter the rowboat that carried you and young Moisha, grandfather-to-be, to witness another vessel miles upstream, the neighbors who didn't make it, to return, toss stones of remembrance into the river, recite Kaddish for names drowned. I want to be caged in the Bucharest jail and fathom the fright of bribing a soldier, to escape, then haggle over a lace dress, wedding ring that'll someday grace a daughter's finger. I'd like to rescue grandfather's mandolin so that I could hear him strum Yiddish folk tunes, the instrument restrung so that his grandson could wail rock songs for a high school band. I'd like to restamp immigration papers that stated your name as Pauline, not Zipporah. Time travel to first sightings of the mother of all exiles, lifting her torch, lighting, you're tired, you're poor, as you struggled with a new language, stepped onto the dock, dirty and pregnant, with my favorite uncle, to hold sweat-pearled hands as we walk, freeing long, deep breaths. Second poem is called My Father's Harmonica. After his death, I found it in a velvet-lined box shaped like a casket. Holding the harmonica, I pictured Dad switching his prison guard hat for a conductor's cap. All aboard, Chattanooga choo-choo. We'd hunkered down in the valley of the couch, Father cupping his tin sandwich as if it were dessert. As if we time traveled to the farm, Mom not too tired to bake apple pie. Was it my imagination, Dad's harmonics as semaphore? Did Good Night Irene, Red Light Heartbreak? Was Love Me Tender, Father's Valentine to Mom, who often looked bereft? I think of wah-wahs that pierce the air after Grandma's death, melodies replacing words to grieve. 97 years, each stanza Dad's diabetic legs quickened, tapping to arpeggios. Mother's frown softening as notes bent into reverie. Did she mourn the night she and Father Lindy hopped in the tiny kitchen to Glenn Miller's In the Mood, chords rising up toward my lost brothers, one stoned upstairs, the youngest at a home for autistic children, all of us quieting as Father thrummed his finale. Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling, harp reeds trembling, I'd pull green drapes across tracks in the den. In sunshine and in shadow, we'd hum Disembark from our emerald isle. Next stop upstairs, unlit rooms, school books on desks. My last poem is called How to Properly Fry an Egg. When family yawns in the farmhouse, the rooster squawking cadenzas, tiptoe downstairs, open the door, apple blossoms and manure wafting through the air. On the walk past willowy cathedrals, gather peonies for the kitchen, if only for petals that cobble the paths toward candles. Quiet your footfalls when you near the barn. From their safe darkness, the birds will hear the sotto voce of whispers as you beckon the leghorn, celebrated for Olympian jumps, or the girl named for a chatty niece. Wandering through hay is the skinny hen who's scarred and feisty. She's the one to follow with song, Sinatra, not Pavarotti, or something peppy, the Supremes, stop in the name of love, of brief flight of wings, of gifts received, eggs that speak without language, ovals bedded in straw ungraded, candled from a lifted palm until dawn's headline, guns and riot, is folded for another day, until what's held reminds you of physics, oscillation, shine, free falls of the unexpected, how the ordinary can spark into Fabergés under quickening light. Place the chosen in the wire basket. They'll soon adorn the cast iron, settle into buttery chunks from the farmer up the road, the cow you've milked. Focus, breathe, tap each egg, conjure heartbeat, radiance, rebirth, alchemy as it inflames, albumin, yolk becoming gold-crowned, white-ringed. Trust small bones in your wrist to twist the spatula. Trust what's easy and over, what's flawed, forgive. Lumps and tears, riverings from mistakes. Count to 10. Let the eggs stop quivering in the pan. They'll have company from the orchestration of hash browns, toast, homemade cider. Coax the eggs onto bramble pink Wedgwood a great aunt bequeathed, platters supporting the eggs with their fine old china bones. Fork in hand, offer grace for leafy garden greens, sun and rain, your farmer father, our birds who came to us, unafraid, everyone young and alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Stephen Paling. And here you are.
All right, thank you everyone for sharing the tail end of a really beautiful afternoon with us. Tonight, I'm going to be reading from my book, Rooms in Old Houses, which was published right on the cusp of the pandemic by Cayuga Lake Books. So I feel in ways like I am relaunching it. So I'll probably give each poem a little introduction, and other than that, just let them speak for themselves. This first poem comes out of a monastic retreat I once took. And I was sitting on the grounds of the monastery reading Thomas Merton, and someone started to mow the lawn. And at first I found that extremely annoying, but then I decided that that was just part of the experience. And so reading Thomas Merton with a lawnmower in the background. It always seems to come to this, and I suspect he would approve. The sweep of the mower back and forth across the broad lawn is the assertion and recession of noise, first destroying silence, then simply putting it in relief. There is no sense waiting for the perfect moment of grace. The next poem is called In the Aquarium, and for many years it was my favorite among my own poems, and the one I pointed to if people wanted to sort of understand what I wanted to write. I don't feel quite that strongly, but it's still one of my favorites. So, In the Aquarium. At the crowded public aquarium in Boston, I stood next to the high central tank with its slow swirl of fish circling past the windows. Some of the fish were so small and still and yellow, they hung on eddying currents, like tiny kites moored with transparent string. Others seemed all eye and gill and dull green flank as their ponderous, slow weight dragged past. One fish swam so close to the window, I swayed as if rocked by the muscle, as if rocked in the wake from the rolling mussels. Looking up, I saw a diver bloom from the surface and hang suspended upside down. Curled in her tubes and fins, she emerged head first as her evanescent membrane of bubbles pulled back toward the surface. She slowly uncurled and looked around the tank, alone in her breath at the center of the turning constellations. The poems in Rooms in Old Houses were written over a long span, almost 50 years, from my late teens until, well, I would consider myself to be, I guess, late middle age, I don't know. And I am a horrible judge of my own poetry when it's new. But this poem I wrote and added to the book while the book was still in press, which is lightning speed for me. And it seems to have turned out okay. So appropriately enough, this is on success in middle age. Most of the dancers have left for the night. Just a few tired revelers now quiet in the shank of the evening. Watch as we do our foxtrot across wooden parquet that also shows its age. You hold your slingback pumps on one finger. I have loosened my tie. Most of the band members, tired now, smile anyway at us, a middle-aged couple past a touch of gray. We dance anyway, knowing the hour is indeed always late and the outcome always uncertain. I've had a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns in my life, and this next poem comes out of that feeling. So this is Guardian Angels. If I have one at all, it's a clumsy one, stumbling out of flight as if surprised to find it even has wings. And if it somehow manages to find the right address, it will arrive when the trouble is over, banging its halo on the door frame or tripping on its robe, then rising awkwardly, bringing me nothing but its crooked, angelic grin. The next poem is the title poem from the book, and one of my favorite themes is to talk about the accumulation of memory, and that's really what this is about. So it's Rooms in Old Houses. Rooms in old houses collect more than dust and old sewing machines. Layers of sunlit afternoons cling in each room. The shade of a widower in white canvas shoes is on the wall next to a dusty fishing rod. In the grain of a wooden floor, a toy train waits and waits at its miniature station, patient in the long absence of a small hand. The halls of these old houses were built wide, but each time you pass from the kitchen to the bedroom, the hallway is smaller by a creak of the house. First, your shoulders will rub the walls in passing, then there will be a groaning and settling in your back, and the weight of the accumulating sunlight will press you to the wall. This next poem is called The Attic of Perished Dreams, and it is about an older me looking back at a younger me and also thinking about my writing. So The Attic of Perished Dreams. I have no love for the ambitious ones, the makers of lists, the keepers of scores, the eyers of ladders with cold rungs and imagined tops beyond the eaves. I feel great love for the one on a stony shore, running a hand through his hair, waiting for poetry to break like dawn, in love with a woman beautiful only to him. He alone should be brought down and allowed to sit again at the dented table in a sunny room, in the space between breakfast and work, allowed to hold the pencil, run his hand over the smoothness of the paper, to feel his heart break open and the words come out at last. And I see my time is almost gone, so I have one last short one. What time in the river, tell me? Only the moon and I witnessed the tide pushing back in from the bay under the uneven ice, which begins to crack deeply along its length. The sound spreads upstream into the pine dark woods, as if the river had shifted once in its chains and announced that landscape is not limit. I feel a similar stir and know it is time to leave. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up is Dan Rosenberg.
Hi. Yeah.
Looking for you, Dan. Oh, there you are.
You got me?
There you go.
There I am. Oh, nothing is quite as unnerving as seeing yourself suddenly grow huge on the screen.
I know.
Thank you for organizing this, Robin, and everyone who works on Spring Rights. I know it's a massive undertaking, and it's so lovely to be part of a group reading with a couple of different genres represented. I think the different qualities of attention that everyone's been asking of us has been really lovely to just sort of sit with and enjoy. So thank you all. And I'm a poet, and my most recent book just came out a couple of months ago, and so I'm going to read a few things from there, and then a brand new thing. Yeah, and this one, book's called Bassinet. This first one's called Husbandry. The green beans topple on thin stems. 2 rats pack their peas across the skin of last night's rain. Again, I have tied the wild to a stake and bid it grow. A sparrow, flush with seeds, stuck headfirst in the feeder, eats and freaks and eats until I reach up, tug it by the tail feathers. It weighs nothing like a heartbeat. Like a breath, I release it into the magnolia, press my heels back down to the grass. Below, a world thrums in the dirt, sheared bricks and landlocked sea glass the worms weave through, smoothed slowly with each step and root. Still deeper, the dead spill their heat from here to the horizon. They don't rise. What rises, rises from them while I stand planted here and sinking. This next one, a lot of these poems sort of circle around around the domestic in this book, around being a father of a young child and a husband. And this one's called Splitting the Worm. We scuttle to a stop at the lake's edge, at the fat plop of a frog's retreat we always barely fail to see. Here, we are ankled in spawn grown boulder, earth crumbling inside, earth crumbling aside instead of down, each chunk of dirt legged and speckled. And now, unsteadied by this ground gone pulsing, we freeze at the thought, what creatures have we trampled in our careless tumble to the water? 3 geese skim by, unconvinced. A buck rejects us. And these rejections are just the ones we see. What blistered systoles we impose with each heel pressed down on the underworld. The blind worms suffer our weight, scorn the light. An arrowhead of sear on my arm, a divot of flesh in my wrist, and here the mosquitoes learn nothing from my flailing. I try to understand the world's single body here in the scrum of the shore. Something surfaces as if from a mirror, and I don't recognize it. Even here, I can't deny my separateness. Sink, love, less than half of our shared flesh, into the lake that raised you. Submerge to your roots. I'll stay here, skeptic lighthouse, itchy at the border. Let's see, I'm at 4 minutes. Yeah, I'll read 2 more here. This one is called Hippocampus 2020. And hippocampus is the name, not just for a part of the brain, but also for seahorses. So in a book concerned with fatherhood, seahorses are one of the only animals where the male bear the young. So fascinating little creatures. Hippocampus 2020. Son, I'm happy as a sea slug, just watching the moon stretch and shimmy. From under these ever-warming waves, son, happy watching it waver, that coin from some distant people, feeling you grow each bone you need inside your thin membrane. Got my brood pouch, got a current for a cradle, here to keep you and keep you safe, son, from my coronet to my tail tip. Here's hoping that coin won't fall down here, my boy, I fear that it'd break my bony plates. Not sure I could regulate the salinity for you if the moon came flipping at us. My main move is holding on. Got this tail wrapped around the seagrass, got these tiny fins. Won't take us far, but we'll stay upright. A heart in my head, son, a head ripe with a little heart. You're growing one too. Soon you'll be upright as me. Same toothless snout, same useless fins. I'm a keeper, son. You'll be a keeper too. The moon shrinks, it grows. I'll hold on right here for you. It's what we do. And then this last one. Thanks, Barbara. So glad that you're here. This last one is a new poem. It's actually it's not out yet. It'll be in the Kenyon Review in the next issue, I think. But it's so it's very new to me. It's called Jobs I've Never Had. Husband to a bloom of box jellies, conductor of a symphony of worms, small god of roots flexing their slow pressure on the underside of the sidewalk, grass lengthener, fluffer of dandelions, designer of several hedge shadows latticed across a gravel shoulder, invisible fence test subject, rotter of new bought pineapples, ghost wrapped in a carnival prize stuffed frog, croaking darkly as the bells and lights carom about the fairway, quiet force holding each bolt on the Ferris wheel in place, stitcher of clouds, shaper of air around the plane's wings, maker of lift while the passengers pulled aloft shift around their discomfort, bride to less air up where the earth's grip thins, man who holds back the moon's eyelid, singer in the void, comet whisperer, eccentric orbit celebration artist, distant cousin to silence and the cold of terrible stillness, inspector of stray atoms, greeter of new stars. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we introduce Daphne, I wanted to just mention that the next event starts at 7. It's the exact same Zoom room as this one. So you can leave and come back. I'll be here playing some music until 7 o'clock. It is called No Strings Attached, and it is a performative reading with Leni Sack, Yvonne Fisher, and Saviana Stanuski. So those guys are great, and they're actors and performers, so it should be really fun. So we hope to see you at 7. And next up is Daphne. We have a lot of time, Daphne, so you could speak really slowly or something. Or if anyone else wants to come in with an encore, just tell me in the chat. But in the meantime, here is Daphne. We have a close-up. There you are. Hi, Daphne.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted and ready to talk.
Okay. Well, I think maybe it's worth knowing that I am a poet recently, that is to say in the last 10 years. And I have been an artist since about 3 years old. So you'll see a little of the artist creeping into the poems one way or another. The first one I'm going to read is called Not a Poem. Sometimes there are things I don't want to write about. This is not a time when I want to bring pain into my life. And I actively hate the poet who murdered a hedgehog with his lawnmower and then put it into a poem. Surfacing from a not very deep place is the rabbit I killed with my car. Thank you, Mr. Poet. Stepping out of ordinary time, I stopped the car and went over to the ditch and watched it die. I drive by that exact place every day, which keeps the memory alive. That's enough pain for me. And turning it into a poem is not my idea of what to do. The end of that rabbit's life abrades my soul. Perhaps I can punch that into an untapped philosophical muse, if it is not too small a happening. But no, death is never, ever small. This is a poem that I wrote in Florida because I went to a poetry workshop there. And we were told to look out at the scenery, very, very jungly, very, very tortured, jungly scenery, and write a poem. And my poem is called A Look at the Surreal World. A few steps down from the boardwalk, I look out at a mass of tangled leaves and vines. And like a bumptious fellow poet, I want to shout out what I see. Lizards, cabbage moths, snake. But instead, return to my cerebral self and shout on paper. Each of those life forms is visible not only through the ebullient Florida vegetation, but also in my reflections on the surreal world in front of me, where even the fact that I made up the snake is allowable. I do not wonder at the strange figurations that Dali, Lorca, and Cocteau put forth. In the natural world with a discerning eye, surreal figurations are part of every jungle, every dooryard, every penthouse garden. My young grandson used to refer to our life form as human beings. And in one Picasso lithograph, Jacqueline, astride a horse, is dressed in full bullfighting regalia. And the artist, Picasso, is on his hands and knees, crouching on the ground. In the face of such strident beauty, what else can a human being do? I love that Garcia Lorca, Pablo Picasso, and Jean Cocteau were fast friends, working together as the group of 27, the year, not the number. 3 artists making new creative visions in a tumultuous political Spain. And when I look up at Picasso's print of Jacqueline as the horseback rider, I am part of that great friendship, following all the wild black marks on paper, a human being, humbly offering adoration to their surrealistic world. This is a poem. I frequently write in Spanish, and this has a Spanish title, but the rest of it is not Spanish. But my husband took us to Peru and to Latin American countries with his research, and so that I, perforce, had to learn it. It's called Lágrimas Últimas, Last Tears. The last time I cried was the evening my husband died. In the weeks and months before, rigid with containment, we were living outside ourselves, in the dry air that surrounded him. His breaths were our breaths, as we watched his struggles with a body that would not die. The intensity of our absorption was useless, even self-indulgent, and in lucid moments, he wickedly brought us out of it. Next time you bring dinner, he said, make it a good bottle of wine, none of that New York stuff. And looking out the window, am I going to be in this bed for the rest of my life? In the darkening room on that final evening, we all sat silent, crying a river of tears, which carried us along with a force that returned us finally to ourselves, fluidity being restored to our dry mouths, our aching limbs. The children would go on to swim in whatever turbulent waters they encountered. But I saw myself, at least at that time, cast up on a bank, grieving anew, because in a solitary act of possession, my husband had taken with him my last tears. Now, this is a poem I wrote for him, originally in Spanish, but I've translated it into English. It's called Song of the Blood. You will never escape me. The aroma of my skin is in the air you breathe. The texture of my hair obscures the landscape on which you gaze. And in your veins, blood surges, seeking the sound of my blood. Those two dark streams come together, separate, and come together again, weaving a net from which neither you or I wishes to escape. I'm going to take a minute of my time to read that in Spanish because it's far more lyrical in Spanish. Canción de sangre. Tú no puedes escaparme. El olor de mi piel está en el aire que respiras. La textura de mi pelo flota sobre el paisaje que tú miras. Y en las venas tuyas corre la sangre, que busco el sonido de mi sangre. Los dos riachuelos se tocan, se separan y se tocan otra vez. Es un trasmayo de que ni uno ni otro de nosotros desea escapar. What's next? I wrote some poems about the pandemic. Not an easy thing to avoid these days. I think it has cast a pall on all of us. The first one is called Not So Funny. Such a funny day, such a funny time. Voices appear from nowhere asking, how are you? As though their anxiety is any help. I don't know how I am and have no means to measure. I, a person never without a rule in pen and hand, I don't know how I am. Touch is one of the things forbidden in this funny time. Space is wired into smallness with stringent boundaries, and to cross them brings fearful consequences. When they ask, how are you? My answer is, I try to be happy. In my head are words, thousands of words, and language paints my wounds. So let those questions rain down on me. I can be happy, I say. In this funny time, I've got poetry. And this is a poem that I wrote to a friend of mine who has very serious COVID, though the long-term one, and suffering badly. It's called Beneficence, in defiance of a virus. A shadowy presence comes down the hall, and when it enters your room, proceeds to paint the walls with images of well-being. The sound of the brush bemuses, the swish, swish is soothing. Windows and doors open so new air can rush in to fill even the darkest corners. And when the shadowy presence leaves your room, sleep and deep breathing silently enter and take up their abode. Since so much of my life was spent in Peru with my husband, I'm going to read this poem, which is about that. It's called Hace 13 años, 13 years ago, an Andean poem. Poets have long lamented the tolling of bells, and when they rang for me, hace 13 años, going back 13 years, the sound was not mellifluous. He's gone, 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 they sang harshly. Oh, how could you be gone? How could you have left me? Was all I heard. That was all I heard then, and año por año, through the years, the sound is still with me, muffled but intoning the Quechua words that framed our lives. Humachaca, Andahuaylas, Chinchero, Cusco, and Huascaran, the snowy peak that punctuates the Andean skyline. Each one of those is a place filled with your presence and mine. And the bells are insistent in their own way, tolling, telling of Quechua people who danced in the plaza, men flicking handkerchiefs at the dancing feet of the women who walked miles in rubber-sandaled feet with babies on their backs, whose bright black eyes peered out from the snug wrapping of a huipil, a word we learned when a man came to our house desperate because his wife had left him. He had sold her huipil to you in all its vibrant colors, not paying attention that it was his wife's wedding shawl, perhaps cast off in their market booth. Quechua women, you can see, are not always quietly subservient. They may walk behind the man and serve him his dinner first. But Quechua women are bright and determined market vendors. The booths ring with their laughter, not infrequently, at the hapless gringos who are part of the crowd. The bells toll out the memory of a niñita, a little girl 5 or 6 years old, dancing all by herself, early morning in the Chinchero Plaza, and I stood drawing her to keep her image with me forever. But there is no forever. Today, when I went looking through my file drawers, I could not find the print I had made of her. And I am left without her and with the sonority of those Quechua village names, ringing out in a language that was the center of our lives. I still hear the bells echoing through those places. Humachaca, Andahuaylas, Chinchero, Cusco, where your presence and mine no longer break the Andean skyline. Okay, that my time?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Quickly want to give a shout out to a event that Brenna Fitzgerald, who read earlier, is doing on Sunday, June 26th, Writing from the Body. It's a Zoom event. It's traditionally been really one of the most popular. I'm going to highlight you, Brenna. One of the most popular workshops that we've done. It's basically, so it's called Writing from the Body. Writers spend a lot of time in the mind, yet vibrant writing is often felt in the body of the reader. And she goes on through a series of mindfulness exercises and writing prompts intended to stimulate the senses and shift perspective. So we recommend that, of course, and we recommend all of our Spring Writes events. But we have a question, the next event is at 7. This one is officially over. But I have a question for Dan. Bye, Brenna. Dan has a question for Daphne. So if anyone wants to hang out, this is now the after party for the first event. I'm going to actually say, I'm going to stop the recording and then we can, no, I'll keep the recording going. So Daphne Dan's question was, Daphne, I just picked up a book of poems at the Friends of the Library book sale by Yehuda Amichai that he translated into English himself. I'd be very interested to learn about your experience of translating your own poems. Have you had to make hard choices to try to turn a poem in Spanish into a poem in English?
Well,
Or vice versa.
it's just very interesting that having written a poem in Spanish, I have just as much trouble turning my words into a good English translation as if it was an utter stranger. Even the reason that I read the poem in Spanish is that it is so much more lyrical in Spanish. And there was no way I could get that in English. There just wasn't. It just wasn't. I'll give you one little example. When the two blood things, they in Spanish it's se tocan, se separan, y se tocan otra vez. And in English it's they come together, they separate, and they come together again. Well, boy, that's clunky.
Yeah.
Compared to the se toca, se separan, but it's but it's always a problem to get the essence of the poet, and the poem, not just translating the words.
It'd be fun to do an event next year with poems in 2 different languages,
Yeah.
Dan, you take care of that.
Yes.
So if anyone has any other questions, they can, just put them in the chat, but we are basically hanging out for an event that starts at 7 o'clock. And if there are no questions, I'll just put on some music and we could all go get a snack. Please write down in the chat what snack you are getting. I'm hungry. And we'll see everybody at 7 o'clock. And I hope you can stay, the people who are in this.
I would hope that these poets each somehow have their email addresses available so that we could communicate. That would be a help.
That's a good, yeah, they're, I've got these artist bios and most have put their websites, but not everybody has a website.
Uh-huh.
So I've just always been saying, if anybody wants to get in touch with anyone else, just let me know. But there have been a lot of people meeting each other, through these events. So it's been kind of fun. I've heard, in the old days, we used to have a party, but I'm still pretty leery myself about going out in public. So I haven't scheduled any sort of a party, and a party on Zoom isn't quite the same, but we used to have cake.
I'm not very clear about what this next event is.
Well, I can tell you what the next event is, and the
Okay.
artists for the next event are actually here. So I'm actually going to read, well, it's called Strings Attached, and it is performative readings. And Yvonne, you can take yourself off mute and explain what a performative reading is. I would say that all three of you, Leni Sack, Yvonne Fisher, and Saviana Stanescu, and I believe I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, are actors and performers and theater performers, and you're reading work in a performative way, right?
And I'm not sure if I can define what it is because it might be different for everyone, but it certainly feels like it's slightly more to perform, bigger than life or dramatic or something. But that can overlap with regular readings, which sometimes are like that anyway. But certainly, I think we are all influenced and affected by our history of doing theater and performing or
Right.